We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Planet Holyrood. I'm Paul Hutcheon, political editor of the Daily Record. I'm joined this week by two editors. We've got John Ferguson, who edits the Sunday Mail. We've got Ben Borland, who edits the Scottish Daily Express. So most of last week's episode focused on the Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar's dramatic intervention when he called for the Prime Minister to stand down. We wondered what the impact of that was going to be in terms of the election, and we got a poll over the weekend. It was in the Sunday Times, I think by Norstat, and I'll just go through some of the headline numbers. So 52% of those polled believed that Anas Sarwar had made the right decision. 26% took the opposite view. 20% said they don't know. But if you look at the actual numbers for voting intentions in the actual election, it hasn't really made much difference whatsoever. Labour, I think, were on 17% on the constituency and the list vote, which was quite far behind their 2021 total, which in itself was their worst ever Holyrood election performance. And if you look at the seat extrapolation in relation to the weekend poll, they're still way behind the SNP and also behind Reform. So, John, it seems like Scots back Anas Sarwar in terms of what he did last week, but they're not backing his party.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this tells us what we kind of already knew, in that Labour in Westminster, Keir Starmer, very unpopular at the moment. Anas Sarwar in Scotland, actually, people quite like him. They think he would do a good job, albeit he's trailing in the polls severely because of the reputational damage that Keir Starmer did the party in London. So it's the poll kind of chimes with things that Labour MSPs have been saying to me, that say that it helps now when they're out on doors. People say they don't like Keir Starmer, and they could say, well, look, we're taking our own course on this. It's not about Keir Starmer, it's about Anas Sarwar. So I think it probably will help in that respect. Where I think that they might run into a bit of bother is closer to an election. If Keir Starmer stays in number 10, there's going to be a lot of tricky TV interviews, etc., debates where people are saying to us, well, look, are you seriously asking people to vote for the Labour Party when you don't think that the Labour Prime Minister should be in his job at the moment? I think that's going to be difficult to handle. As popular as Anas seems to be in Scotland, they are still trailing quite badly, and it's I don't know overall if Keir Starmer's still Prime Minister in a couple of months' time, whether there'll be a net gain or loss from it.
Ben, I mean, you weren't on last week. What was your take? Do you think that in the context of the election, it's going to help the Scottish Labour leader?
Yeah, I think it will. I think, as you said, John, it's going to get brought up all the time in TV debates. And I think every time it's brought up, it reminds people that Anas Sarwar doesn't like Keir Starmer either. So you sat at home, you're going, I can't stand that Keir Starmer. And it's a reminder that Anas Sarwar doesn't like him either. I don't think he's... Obviously, it was a coup attempt. Or was it? We'll never quite know the machinations.
One-man coup.
One-man coup. Or was it just a placement? This is where I stand. I'm going to define myself that voters don't like Keir Starmer. I don't like him either. That I think he's just defined that, and it's going to help. I think the more it's brought up, it helps. And I think obviously Labour are going to lose the South Manchester by-election. I don't think that'll be the end of him. So Keir Starmer is going to still be in a job come May the 7th.
It's going to be pretty bad if they do lose that by-election, isn't it?
It's going to be bad.
It's going to be cast as you blocked the candidate who could have won this for Labour to save your own skin, and now... I
don't think that brings him down, though. I just don't think there's an obvious candidate.
What it does do, though, is if they lose that by-election, people will say, well, Anas Sarwar was right.
That will bolster Anas Sarwar's position. I mean, where Keir Starmer may go, and this won't help Anas Sarwar, is if Labour do terribly in the Scottish elections, finish third. They do terribly in the Welsh elections and finish third, and they get wiped out across all these English councils. Then he probably is toast, but by then Anas Sarwar's
Ironically, the one thing that could be really bad for Anas Sarwar is if Labour was to now win this by-election, then people say, "Oh well, Keir Starmer's not doing that after all."
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a good point.
I think that is something that his allies have discussed. I think the problem for Anas Sarwar is that he doesn't follow through on this, because a lot of voters are just disengaged. They might have seen on the TV last week that he called for the Prime Minister to stand down, but many voters will not know that he did it because they don't consume politics in the same way that saddos like we do. So I think he has to really double down on this and keep reminding voters about this move. But when he does that, he will antagonise Downing Street and the UK party.
I think it will have cut through. I mean,
I think it has, but I think it has to cut through with more voters.
Yeah, true. I think the fact is, even in Scotland, there are a lot of people who watch the UK news and they watch maybe don't watch the Scottish bulletins. They don't follow Scottish news. They follow sort of the big, and it made an impact at that level. Whereas some of the policies that Labour have announced, that just haven't. I mean, arguably, the other, where Anas Sarwar and Jackie Bailey are kind of pinning their hopes is on the hospital scandal. That's gained a bit of traction as well. I mean,
it's a hugely important issue, but most folk will not have had a terrible experience with the NHS like these poor patients that the mums and dads have had. And I'd take my hat off to him over what he's done over the Queen Elizabeth, but in terms of the actual impact on the election, I'm not sure it's going to be huge.
I suspect most people kind of view that as a hospital NHS scandal in their head rather than specifically a SNP scandal.
Well, also, I bet you, see if you were to poll people on who do you blame for the Queen Elizabeth scandal, because people have this sort of confused knowledge of the political system. Some of them might say Keir Starmer.
Well, some of them would probably say Boris Johnson. Maggie Thatcher.
Yeah, 20% would probably blame Thatcher. You're right. So I think Anas Sarwar really wants to be in the position where, rather than a third of voters knowing that he wants the Prime Minister to stand down, he wants that to be 80, 90%. So people no longer associate with regard as a failing Prime Minister.
I think you're absolutely right that he's in a difficult position. Do I double down in this every day? Because it's an odd one, the leader of Scottish Labour getting up every day.
Oh, there's another press release.
The Prime Minister is a disgrace. He has to go. It's a tricky line to walk. And I think you're right. What he seems to be doing at the moment is he's saying, well, I've said my piece. I think he should resign. I stand by what I said, even though I still think he's a good guy. And ultimately, if he was to survive, then I think he could do a good job. And I think you're right. That's a bit of a problem for him, how you progress. I think, now, I have to say, I do believe, after speaking to Anas last week, I would tend to believe him that I don't think there really was a particularly organised coup. I think that maybe he thought others were going to start speaking out, but I get the impression that he genuinely did. It was frustration over all of these scandals constantly overshadowing what was happening in Scotland.
It all seemed very
thought.
ad hoc and last minute as well. It was just sort of seemed to come out. It's like he just woke up and thought, you know what?
Probably felt he was running out of time. Running out of time, and just decided to do it. When is a good time to hog the microphone? I mean, what I think is, it's not remarkable, but it's striking about Labour's campaign is that Anas Sarwar seems to be running against his own party. I mean, you look at the backdrops, it's Scotland's Choice, doesn't mention Labour. And then there was the YouTube advert where I think at the end it's Anas Sarwar for First Minister, which is a sort of play on what Alex Salmond did back in 2007 with Labour way down in the small print. I'm not saying he's embarrassed by his party, but it's very much a presidential pitch rather than Labour versus SNP.
Personally, I don't think he's on a. I mean, he's a good politician and he's a nice bloke. He's not Alex Salmond though. I don't think.
I think
He's
it's
got that
interesting.
same aura.
If you remember when he and Monica Lennon were challenged to become leader, one of the ideas that Monica Lennon put forward that time was that the Scottish Labour Party should genuinely break away and be a separate entity from UK Labour, sort of in the same way that Scottish Greens are not connected organisationally to Greens UK level. And it's interesting, like, are we essentially, is that what's happened now? It feels like that's in effect what we have at the moment. There was an interesting line in the one of the reports in the BBC last week. It said Scottish Labour have the funds on their own now to fight this election. So if they're acting at the moment in a financially independent capacity, the leader of the party thinks that the Labour Prime Minister should resign. There's clearly not sort of working together going on there. Then is Scottish Labour now effectively a different party from
I wrote
UK
a
Labour?
piece on Sunday basically saying that Anas Sarwar paved the way for a separate Scottish Labour Party, and I think that that's the way we're heading, because whether you think it's right or wrong, they're not judged on their own merits. They had that general election result in 2024 as a result of the strength of the UK party. The opposite is now true. They're trailing. They're in third place because the UK party is down in the dumps. So there is a sort of feeling like, don't you want to be judged based on what you do yourself rather than in relation to the so-called parent party? And they've probably got more money now than they have in many years. So I would expect that if they do go down to defeat in May, that will be on the table for discussion.
The truth is, Scottish Labour have never got to grips with devolution, and it kind of feels like perhaps that's the only way to do it.
Just one thing, one of the tycoons that bankroll Scottish Labour, Lord Willie Haughey, he's got his own podcast, and he had some sort of fascinating insights into the Starmer Sarwar thing. And he described it as the best Machiavellian plot ever hatched by Labour. And this is his thinking. He said, "Today, Anas is in a much stronger position than he was last week, and so is Keir Starmer. It's going to go down as the best Machiavellian plot that Labour ever hatched. That's a fact."
Wow, there you go. I didn't know that there was another political podcast out there.
Well, that's a business one, but they strayed on to politics just briefly. But I think Willie Haughey has a point in the sense that Anas Sarwar, I think it was good for him, but it also did actually embolden the Prime Minister in the short term.
Yeah, basically, the Prime Minister went round the cabinet and said, "Back me or you're out," and they all jumped on board.
Is Willie Haughey suggesting that maybe
Sarwar
and Starmer are working together on
this? I mean, I've heard that conspiracy theory being floated. I'm not convinced myself.
It feels to me a bit like, when people accuse newspapers of Machiavellian plots to have politicians elected, and, to help governments fall. It's like, we are not that clever. Actually, I have a feeling that Labour is way too chaotic to actually come up with something like that.
If it has turned out like that, it's by accident rather than by design, isn't it?
It would be great, though, if the Prime Minister had called up Anas Sarwar and said, "Look,
call for me.
This is what you call for me to go, and then I will make sure that all my cabinet back me, and then we'll both be better off."
Or maybe Starmer was actually trying to get rid of Anas. He reckoned by making him think it would be a good idea to call for him to go, that he would survive and ultimately Anas would have to go.
Well, there we go. All right, let's move on from Labour. Story 2, or issue 2, the financial problems facing our councils. They're all about to set their council tax rates. I think some are going to push through rises of 9-10%. I had a story this morning about Glasgow City Council. Now, their black hole is, I think, between 40 and 50 million pounds. And there's a couple of things that are on the table. I should say there's no final decision on it. It could change, but they're looking at 5% council tax rise and also an accounting trick, which will mean they have to borrow about £30 million, and that's to fill a black hole that is largely caused by the homelessness crisis in the city, which is in itself not, would I say largely or mainly, a huge contributing factor in that is the refugee homelessness situation, where you've got a huge increase of refugees granted leave to remain, applying for homelessness assistance in Glasgow. So, John, Glasgow again is facing a very difficult budgetary situation. Raising taxes and borrowing more in order to address this issue. You can see the optics in terms of the problems with that.
Yeah, I mean, anyone looking around, and this isn't just Glasgow, I think anyone looking about their community in any part of Scotland can see this kind of, anyone around our age can see this tragedy of towns where there used to be a library and a community centre and sort of vibrant public services, swimming pools, and so much of this stuff is closed down just because councils have no money. In Glasgow, famously, they've had to mortgage off the art galleries, their own city chambers, various sporting venues. So the crisis in local authority funding is real, and it's really tragic, I think, for our cities and communities. If you're looking for the root cause of that, probably you need to go back in history and look at the decision to sell off council houses, which was this huge income for local authorities in the past. They clearly are genuinely up against it, and now Glasgow is this added issue of having I think probably genuinely to do the right thing, said, yes, we're a welcoming city, we'll take as many refugees as possible, but the money just isn't there to adequately house them. And I think that the problem now is that you can end up creating, if you do something like that without the resources to do it properly, then you could actually end up with a public backlash. So what do you do? Really, you've got to get more money from central government, or you've got to raise council tax. It looks like there is no extra money coming from central government, and so there's going to be more big council tax increases coming in the next sort of month or so, and people aren't going to like it. But what else can you do, really?
Ben, I mean, isn't it the case that if this plan was to get the green light, council tax rises and borrowing more in order to address the refugee homelessness crisis, I mean, Reform would pounce on that?
Reform would pounce on it. I would say that there is something that the Scottish government can do, and they can reinstate the local connection rule, which is the root cause of this is some have described it as virtue signalling. The decision taken in 2022 that anyone in Scotland at any local authority can apply for put in a homelessness application, and they must be put on the housing register, even if they don't have a connection to the area. Previously, you had to have a connection. You had to have family in the area. You had to have lived there previously. You had to have worked there previously. And the local connection rule went. The councils asked the Scottish government to reinstate it, and they've said no. And that's why you're getting people coming
the root cause. I mean, that is a factor, but I think if you look at it's a huge surge in the last few years, maybe 2 or 3 years. The biggest factor, I'm not saying abolishing local connections is not a factor. It is. The biggest factor is trying to close the asylum hotels. That is the Home Office is the main problem, not the only problem, but by closing the hotels, you're basically making asylum seekers destitute.
The hotels were only
refugees destitute.
The hotels were only put in place during the pandemic as an emergency stopgap measure. They were never designed before 2020. Asylum seekers didn't stay in hotels. It was put in during the pandemic, and they were always going to close. So this is
No, I think the policy is fine. It's just that the Home Office has to make sure that they're not just in trying to do that politically. They're not creating a huge problem for local councils in terms of their funding. There should be extra funding for councils in order to deal with a huge surge in applications from refugees.
But the surge is a large part of it is due to the fact that refugees, say they're in Manchester, Birmingham, they've been given leave to remain. They're in Birmingham, and Birmingham Council's going, oh, you're going to have to stay in a housing shelter. We can't guarantee you a house. And lo and behold, travel up the West Coast main line, and there's a council that will guarantee you a home.
Yeah, so it's a combination of the Home Office policy and also Scotland's liberal homeless and housing laws. And the people who are having to pick up the tab are just ordinary Glaswegians in the form of higher council tax and maybe extra borrowing. I mean, in my story today, I think talks are ongoing between the council and both governments. It would be nice if between those governments they actually gave Glasgow extra funding. I think you might have heard that this could be being discussed behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean, there's various rumblings that there is going to be some kind of financial package agreed to help Glasgow with the specific problem that it has. And yeah, I think it would be the right thing. I mean, we talk about the root cause of this. You're probably right that Glasgow's liberal policy and these things has caused an insurge of refugees, Scotland, but ultimately the refugees were there, and it was going to be a problem for someone.
It was going to be a problem to deal with.
So, I mean, you can argue over who's to blame, or actually, it's very interesting. We look at the stats. It was under Boris Johnson that immigration really rocketed for a couple of years over the pandemic, and it has now come down to roughly normal historic.
The Boris wave.
The Boris wave is real. You could have an argument over whether that should have been allowed to happen or not, but we are where we are. It did happen for Scotland.
I don't think they were
specifically.
Refugees, though. They were mostly students and their families. That was the decision. It was to allow.
Well, I mean, overall immigration today under Labour, they don't really talk about this that much, but it's roughly where it's been throughout the sort of 90s, noughties. The huge increase came.
You're right. They don't talk about it much. You'd think that would be the number one thing on every Labour minister's lips.
It's kind of strange to me that they don't make a virtue of that, but nonetheless, we are where we are. Obviously, immigration, if it happens too fast and too high numbers, can cause a lack of social cohesion. I think you need to accept that. But there is also the issue that Scotland, until now, and I think interestingly, one of the people who have pointed this out was Reform's new leader before he got the job, that actually Scotland needs immigration. It's had a falling population. We need more working age young adults in the community who are keen to learn, get educated, and contribute to the economy. So this could be a boon if we make it one. Let's get these refugees decent accommodation, the right to work and contribute, and build a new Scotland.
I've said before, the issue is not that there are too many asylum seekers in Scotland or there are too many refugees in Scotland. It's about the distribution that puts huge pressure on one city. So you look at Fife as an area, or the Highlands. Last time I wrote about it, I think neither local authority area had any asylum seekers being housed in terms of the Home Office accommodation side. And that's just not sustainable. You need the Home Office dispersing asylum seekers across the whole of Scotland rather than just in one area. And I think other local authorities, when it comes to the homelessness side, they need to be pulling their weight.
Yeah, I think someone needs to come up with the cash to solve this problem, and it's not really fair to say, let's just let the council taxpayers of Glasgow deal with the problem. There needs to be an acceptance that the money needs to get ponied up from somewhere, and central government's really the only place that can fairly take responsibility for it.
Well, certainly. I mean, I wouldn't be at all surprised if after the election, the local connection rule is temporarily suspended in Glasgow. But I mean, if it's the country's largest council, it's SNP run, arguably Susan Aitken is the second most important SNP politician in Scotland. She's asked. I mean,
She has asked, and she's been turned
practically
down.
begged for the local connection rule to be suspended, and she's been turned down. I just think it's a strange one.
Final issue, bit of a bugbear of mine: freedom of information. So, for over 20 years, we've had a pretty good right to know law, and that was largely down to the late Jim Wallace, who was the Lib Dem Deputy First Minister. He made sure that Scotland had a better FOI law than was the case south of the border. But I think I can say this without fear of contradiction: the SNP government's record on FOI has been bloody awful. I've been covering politics for a long time. I remember Alex Salmond's attitude to FOI. It was dreadful. He tried to neuter the powers of the FOI commissioner and tried to undermine the law in all sorts of ways. Nicola Sturgeon wasn't particularly impressive either when it came to FOI. What happened on Tuesday was that a Labour MSP called Katie Clark had an FOI bill basically trying to toughen up the law. She had a number of very sound proposals. I'll just go through them. Extending FOI coverage to all bodies delivering public services, strengthening the powers of the Information Commissioner, scrapping the First Minister's veto over FOI. The Scottish Government opposed this. There was a bit of a fudge, a bit of a compromise, and in the final analysis, the Katie Clark legislation has been kicked into the long grass. So it's not going to become law. And I think they're going to look at it in the next session of
the
Parliament.
long grass is getting very crowded.
The grass is very long. So not a huge surprise. But Ben, the Scottish Government's attitude to FOI over the last couple of decades has been a disgrace.
It's awful, yeah. I mean, clearly our political leaders don't want the public to know that they like operating in secret behind closed doors. They don't want people to know things apart from what we're fed and spoon fed in sort of. It's been checked by all different departments and all manner of spin doctors until it's sort of ready for public consumption. They just don't want us knowing, and it's no surprise this has been delayed. That's all.
I mean, I think people just associate FOI with journalists, but it has helped ordinary members of the public uncover all sorts of things that would not have otherwise been released. And I think, although Tuesday was a disappointment for campaigners of transparency and openness, I think what it does show is that if there was any attempt by the SNP to try and rein in FOI, there would be a huge public backlash and a huge media campaign to thwart that. So the law as it stands seems safe. And I think the Scottish Government will be pushed in the next term, whether it's Labour or SNP, to strengthen it even more.
Yeah, I mean, for people who don't kind of understand how the piece of law works, it's a great thing. It means that anyone, whether you're a journalist or a member of the public, can ask not just the Scottish Government, but any public body for a piece of information, and if they hold the information, they are duty bound to give you it unless they can argue. And then there's a few exemptions, things like it would cost too much to get the information, or this was private discussion between ministers, or various other things. There is no doubt that this is a huge thorn in the side of Scottish Government and other bodies, and that they will, where possible, try not to give out information that they think might be damaging or embarrassing to them. The sort of way it works, that as it's been described to me, is that, you know, the civil servants will generally receive the request for information, and, you know, they don't particularly have a dog in the fight. They'll go get all the information required, collate it, prepare it to be released to the journalist. Before it's released to the journalist, John Swinney or whoever First Minister's special advisor team gets sight of it, and they bring out a big red pen and start putting a line through anything that's potentially embarrassing or whatever, and think up an excuse not to, you know, why that would be, whether that would, we can say that would cost too much, or we can say that was a private discussion or whatever. If you believe that the best thing to make democracy work well as openness and transparency, then that's clearly a really bad thing. The best thing is that the more people know about how government is operating, how decisions are being made, the better. The knock-on effect will be that will make our politicians more honest. So yeah, anything that strengthens FOI has got to be a good thing. I mean, it's probably quite an expensive piece of legislation to implement. There is a huge cost attached with doing all this stuff, but my feeling, obviously, as a journalist, is that it's a good thing, and the stronger this legislation, the better.
I think I might be wrong. I think FY came into force in 2005 when it was a Labour Lib Dem executive, and obviously it was like a new toy, and I went hog wild, and I just absolutely blitzed the Scottish
I
government.
remember in the press corridor at Holyrood, there used to be a league table of who submitted the most FOIs, and you were often at the
but what I remember was, I think within 6 months of the law coming into force, the Scottish government proactively, or I think they got a Tory backbencher to put in an FOI request to the Scottish government about the journalists who put in the most requests, and it was an attempt to kind of shame us into just calming down a bit, but actually emboldened us to put in even more.
I think an important point to remember about this is that it wasn't as if, it was this great new toy, but it did kind of coincide with the rise of spin and this huge expansion of the number of press officers, not just in the government again, but across the police, every kind of public organisation. So it used to be that as a journalist, you could phone up someone you knew, a police officer or a politician and a government minister, and they would genuinely just tell you stuff. Yes. Rise of spin and the army of press officers that are employed by the government. All of this stuff is very carefully controlled, and so you needed something to counterbalance that, something that stopped a press officer stepping in and just saying, "Nah, don't bother telling them that. It could be embarrassing."
Yeah, it's again, this is sort of a niche thing, but I think wider than just journalism, it also coincided with the rise of social media and blogs, and there's lots of, for want of a better term, citizen journalists who've used FOI because they're not getting the contacts, they're not able to ring up and say, "Can I speak to this minister?" But they're able to put in FOIs. I mean, look at Benjamin Harris, the guy who's been brilliant at holding the Scottish government to account over the salmon inquiry. A member of the public.
Before I don't want to give the impression that this is simply an SNP problem. Labour and government were absolutely dreadful when it came to FOI as well. I remember after the peace legislation came into force, I think there was an attempt to then roll back and create a two-tier system that basically you'd have ordinary members of the public being able to submit requests for nothing, but then having a sort of professional tier as well of lawyers and journalists who'd have to pay for it. That was kiboshed. And then, of course, Tony Blair famously in his memoir said it was his biggest regret. I've just got the quote. He said, "You idiot, you naive, foolish, irresponsible nincompoop. There is really no description of stupidity, no matter how vivid, that is adequate. I quake at the imbecility of it." So that Tony Blair thinks that was his biggest mistake rather than Iraq.
What, bringing in FOI?
Yeah.
Grief. Was it not an American law first? Was it not a Clinton era sort of thing?
I think America had it in the wake of Watergate.
We
gradually caught up. But it's a very popular law. It does provide transparency, and no wonder governments, whether they're at Westminster or Holyrood, hate it.
I still think the US leads, many problems, but it certainly leads the way when it comes to look at the Epstein files. Imagine if the Crown Office were to dump all the salmon documents online. So here.
And also, there's like public websites that you can sign up to at a federal or state level in America where you can access court papers.
Yeah. CIA papers.
It's light and day. You compare the US to the UK on transparency. So let's be more like America on this specific issue. So thanks very much to Ben and to John for joining me, and thanks also to Angus on the Daily Record video team who produced this episode. You can listen to Planet Holyrood on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or watch it on the Record YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok for the latest news and the best bits of the podcast.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.